pretty basic. The VMs that I have set up for exploitation can all be done via Metasploit. They should all have pretty obvious first choices when using Metasploit to choose an exploit. The idea was more to give people a feel for using commands and kind of going through, giving people an opportunity to kind of get a feel for working inside Metasploit. If you've never worked in it before, sometimes it'd be a bit daunting. You sit there and look at the list of commands and kind of be overwhelming. So this will be a very wide and very shallow look in many ways. So there's where I'm roughly trying to break it down. We'll go as quick or as slow as we need. I want to make sure everybody kind of has an understanding of each topic before we go on to the next one. Most of the time, I've actually broken down. I've probably only got 20 slots. Most of the time, I've got broken down into the labs. I think I've designed the idea behind 6 individual labs, given about 20-30 minutes per, depending on what working on. If you do have a computer and you're connected and you're trying to hit the lab, in case it wasn't obvious, I have a wireless network called Metasploit class. And if any of you are hackers, you may have tried what would the SSID be. Guess what? The SSID and the key are the exact same. I'm lazy and I want to make it easy. So you want to connect to that Wi-Fi. You're probably going to want, if you're using virtualization, whatever VM you're using, you're probably going to want bridged, not natted. That way you get an IP on the right subnet, and I've seen weird shit happen with VM nets like that. I don't remember if I copied this slide again later. So this is my general, just kind of quick reference sheet. So if anybody, like I said, this was going to be covering a very wide level, trying to cover as much as I can in 4 hours, but there's a lot of content that can't be covered in that time. So I recommend, if you've not done a lot of diving into Metasploit, you're looking for stuff to kind of study after this, those are good resources to start with. There's a lot of stuff. The one thing that I'll say is a lot of the stuff that's out there is really dated. And the reason I say this is a lot of it's built on, the Metasploit penetration tester's guide. That book is probably close to 10 years, maybe not 10. It's at least 5, if not pushing 8 years old. Metasploit Unleashed, that training is forever old. So, the Metasploit GitHub wiki is pretty up to date, but it's not as easy necessarily to follow step by step if you're trying to learn from new. The SANS cheat sheet is great in the sense that it gives you kind of an overview of some of the Metasploit commands and some of the functionalities within the page. And they've actually, I think, kept that pretty up to date. So to kind of give this high-level overview of kind of how we're going to go through the flow of class, one of 8 million different possibilities of how people will drop the penetration testing cycle. So in this, obviously, you're not going to worry too much about kind of the first stage. We're going to be looking mostly between recon and post-exploitation. So the lower half of the Pentagon there. And I'll kind of highlight each of those sections as we go through the Metasploit. This is kind of the high-level overview of Metasploit. And pretty much all of our focus is going to be on kind of the core commands and on some of the modules. This kind of gives you an overview of how the different components all come together. So for the most part, most of the extensions people are going to do are going to be in the module section. So Metasploit was designed to be extendable, and so that's why it's set up this way. We're going to be working in kind of the interfaces area, which works using primarily MSF console for this, and that's going to go through and all those interface with the core libraries. Alright, so I kind of already said at the beginning, So installing Metasploit, there's a couple different ways to do it. I do have VMs available, so if anybody doesn't have a VM and wants to be able to do the labs, feel free to come up and grab one of the thumb drives. Other things you can do is, installing Kali is probably one of the quickest ways for most people, just because the distribution comes with Metasploit already installed, and it has a bunch of the other tools too. And fight over it. Go. It's USB 3, so except for the one, they're USB 3, so they should copy off really fast if you have USB 3 ports. I think it took like 2 minutes to copy them off. So you can use the nightly installer, which is actually, I'm trying to remember if I just installed Kali when I built these. I feel like I built these from Debian and then used the nightly installer. And then you can also install the full dev environment. There's whole instructions on GitHub on how to build out the dev environment if you're actually going to develop for it. But the easiest two methods are usually just installing Kali or using the nightly installer. It will go through, and they've actually got a single line. It's basically a single line command that you can run in Linux that grabs the script, runs it, and adds the Metasploit repo into your OS source repositories, and installs it. So it's pretty straightforward. The only other thing you have to do once you've got it installed is initialize the database, and that's just running an MSFDB in it. So, like I said, it's pretty easy to install. Hey, Lab 1 installing Metasploit. So I want to make sure everybody can get to, if everybody has it, as everybody's working to get their VMs up, I'm going to kind of move a little bit to the next stage. If you run into any issues, let me know, and I can try to take a look when we get to the actual first lab, because by then everybody will be kind of do some self-guided time. Like I said, I have a lot that I want to try to cover in 4 hours span. So these are kind of the core tools, more or less, of Metasploit, which you can actually kind of run from a command line. So MSF console, which is what we're going to use for the most part today, is kind of what most people associate with Metasploit. It is the kind of command. It is the interface to the tool to all the modules, and actually performing any operations. MSF Venom is for doing, if you're going to create payloads outside of using the console, it can do all the different encodings and generate standalone tools that you can create a Metasploit payload, let's say like a USB stick if you're doing like an on-site assessment. Then all the support tools, MSFDB for creating and maintaining databases, RPC, which actually is an RPC and RPCD tools. Those are used for controlling remote Metasploit sessions or Metasploit framework instances. And MSF update, which is basically just a script to update the Metasploit. So, like I said, pretty much all the work we're going to wind up doing is going to be in MSF console. If you've got a VM up and running, I'd recommend just running MSF console now and getting it up. And basically, there's a bunch of commands that you've got access to inside Metasploit. I've kind of just listed a few of them here. These are actually probably the ones I use most commonly. And help is going to be your best friend inside Metasploit, especially when you get into want to do certain weird things with some of the commands, because a lot of the functions are very can be very complex, right? So, as an example, like search is, you can easily just do a search and search for like an individual string, but there's actually a whole series of command switches that you can use to basically search for specific, like only search specific things. So you can tell it, well, I want to search for only exploit modules that have to do with a certain platform. So you can really narrow down searching instead of just doing general string-based searching. There's a lot of stuff with like hosts and services to kind of filter out the listing of information, which is great if you're doing an assessment or doing some sort of network-based attack where you've got a large network. For working through these labs, it's not going to be a huge issue because I literally have 2 or 3 VMs that I managed to get built before class. Okay, yeah, so already the last 2. So you can start kind of going through, just want everybody kind of, for at least like the next like 15 minutes or so to kind of look through this. And then I'm actually going to kind of run through how I would go about doing this, and we'll kind of like see. So, like I said, use the help command to do the search and kind of get an idea of what kind of what functionality you can use with the search command, and then just use that to search for. Like I said, there's a very specific phrase I gave you there. If you look and run that search, and if you look at search, you'll see there's a lot of different ways. Like you could try to do like a search for Windows Apache, and you might get some responses back. But it may wind up filling out a lot of stuff because it's more or less doing a real stupid string search. But there are a bunch of like switches and stuff, so you can kind of see how you can narrow that down. And then we'll do the same thing with TCP scanner. Actually, I'll go back real quick to there. There's something covered when I was going to this slide. So one of the things I probably should have talked about a little bit more when I was here is modules. So the way Metasploit is structured when you're doing use and you're looking for components and modules, they're broken down. The key ones are auxiliary, exploits, payloads, and post. There's a few other oddball ones, but those are the 4 main ones that we're going to wind up using in here. So like if you do a use command to load a module, it's usually going to go use auxiliary, and then it's going to start breaking down by either platforms, and then by service types, and then what the actual tool is. So auxiliary is going to have all your things like scanners and information gathering tools. That's a lot of the like pre-exploitation stuff. A lot of that stuff resides in the auxiliary area. Exploit is going to be pretty much all the exploitation tools that you're going to use to actually gain access to a system. Payload is just the different payload modules, and those you're almost exclusively going to use by setting a payload inside an exploit module. And post is all the kind of post gathering stuff. So there's a lot of information gathering items in there. There's a few persistence and a few other bits and pieces. So that's kind of the rough breakdown. That way it will kind of make more sense when you kind of start searching and looking through modules why everything is set up that way. Now that we've got to this point, who still doesn't have a working VM, needs help getting it up and going? Anybody?
Good question. What's that? Is there another user?
Oh yeah. So if you're using the VM that I put up, the standard user is user, and the password is user backwards. RESU.
What's the password for the Metasploit Wi-Fi network?
It is the Metasploit class. So Metasploit class is the SSID, Metasploit dash class is the
Okay.
Just sit on the floor. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I give you candy. No, you can't eat it. Yeah, no, you can't. Oh, it's good.
Not bad old age.
Where's the VM?
I have something here.
Virtual box, so it's full screen.
I don't remember how to do it.
Okay. I mean, like, it's supposed to be higher resolution.
I did right
Oh,
now.
God. That happened. You just made it so it was
Yes.
And then do you have like, do you have like VirtualBox or anything installed? Yeah, just download VirtualBox.
Yeah. Machines that use this and stuck with that, so. Stuck to one grade.
Initialize the database. I got switch.
So one thing I'll just kind of go over real quick here while I've got this up that I didn't really talk much about in the slides is the workspaces. So when you've got a database set up and connected, that's when you can actually create. You can actually create and work in different workspaces that you can separate out what you're working on. And basically, it's a good way to keep organized if you've got. Oh, this things. That's when my brain doesn't work. So, and it gives you a way to kind of separate out information. So, if you're dealing with a very large network, it can be good to segment off different pieces of that network. One of my past jobs, one of my responsibilities was our internal network, which was very large. So workspaces were a great way to basically separate stuff off by subnets and other ways to make it easier to look at networks and pieces instead of trying to process thousands of hosts at once. So it's a neat little thing to be able to use, but it's not a necessity to know how to use them. A lot of the assessments I do now, I don't have to because the reality is I'm typically dealing in much smaller subsets. So I don't use it as much as I used to. Let's see what did I have before that? Alright, so let me search. So as far as I can type, I'm a great typer. What's that? So if you run the help for search, you can see, I kind of mentioned this earlier, all the keywords that you can use to kind of narrow down searching. And so part of this first lab is to kind of show some of this in action, right? The idea was to look for a TCP scanner. You can just do a search for that without any of the limiting factors. Oh my God, there's, I guess it doesn't help if this is graphic text. It's showing pretty much anything that references TCP or scanning. And I believe it will support the quotes and clean up a little bit. But the reality is, this is where all the search functionalities can come in handy, right? So you can do as I mentioned, it's a scanner, so it will be an auxiliary. And then if you did, you can just search that now. So you're still going to get a lot because scanner comes up with everything. This is one of those cases where it's probably just best to do that. And when you get a lot, you will come up with these port scanners. So we'll see a bunch of them show up. You'll get a bunch of port scan ones. So you'll see the different TCP scan types. So one of the things, in here I'm going to focus primarily on using the TCP scanner modules. One of the other great things to be able to, that you can actually do and will load directly into your database if you have one, is there's a DB Nmap tool in Metasploit. Since I don't have Nmap installed, but basically, if you've got Nmap on a system, like I said, I don't have it right now, it basically, DB Nmap will run Nmap and import all the data into your database. Part of the reason why I was avoiding doing this in classes because even if you've worked with Nmap, there's tons of commands. I could do an entire day of just Nmap. It's a great tool if you know Nmap, you're used to using Nmap, you know a lot of the command switches, or you get comfortable using it. It can be useful in here because it will pull all that data that Nmap grabs. You can also do imports and exports of Nmap XML files, and that's it. And then you can import DB import, I think is the one you use that will grab. You can give it an XML input from output from a map and import a lot of the stuff too. Again, trying to focus mostly on using the internal modules for various reasons. Like I said, when we do the search, you can see a lot of the structure I was talking about before, where stuff is broken down into individual types. So you can see like the auxiliary scanners. Some of them are based on our individual service base. So there's a couple of classes of HTTP scanners, port scanners. There's the knowledge service commands that come up in auxiliary, so things that you can use to do service. So there's a whole bunch of just different things that fall under auxiliary. So who's still working to get up a VM? Anybody? The last part of what I was sort of saying for lab is basically picking up what scanner I'm doing use. So here's auxiliary scanner, port scan. So, two commands that are helpful once you do have a module loaded are info and options. Options basically just returns the.
Press the button you must. Everybody love yoga.
So, options will basically give you a list of variables that you can set with the for the different modules, and they'll all have different ones will have different functionalities. The ones almost always going to be common is some form of rhost or rhost. The only difference really between info and options is info also gives you the description information as well as the name and ranks and all that, who develops the module, and a description of it. So otherwise, it's mostly just print out the basic options. And sometimes there's other useful information. So you'll find in exploit modules, it'll list some of the modules will list out what there's specific versions of Windows that Windows exploits valid against. It will list out it'll list out the list of targets and tell you which operating systems are vulnerable. So there's other information that can be useful that comes out from the info that doesn't come out in options. But for auxiliary modules, it's mostly just the description. So yeah, once you get into modules, there will be a couple extra commands that are going to come up, and so. So you'll see these if you run a help while you have a module loaded. You'll see them listed down here, and it kind of gives you the overview of what they do. So it's almost really just 3 commands because really exploit and our exploit, run, and rerun are pretty much all the same. So our exploit is basically rerun, and exploit and run are basically the same. The only difference between running exploit a second time, running like our exploit rerun, is it will reload the module before it executes the command. Reload can do manual reloads, and then check. Certain modules will have the ability to do checks. This can be useful if, when looking at exploits, if you want to validate if the system is vulnerable to the exploit without actually running it. If the module supports the check, it will actually do that vulnerability check for you. So you don't actually have to send a payload over the wire to actually see if it's going to be exploitable. So that can be useful. That can be useful as well. And that's what, if you're wondering if a module has check, that's where the useful comes in handy, because it should have the system here one way or the other if it's supported. The other thing is setting variables. Basically, it's pretty straightforward. It is set variable name and value. The biggest thing is to try to know is to make sure you know what words are this one. To know what values sometimes that they're actually looking for, what formats. So it's usually pretty well laid out over here, and if they've got a default value, they'll usually it will tell you. It'll kind of hint at you what kind of value it's in there. Alright, so back to the cycle. So now we're going to get into the recon and scanning phase. This is why we loaded up the TCP module earlier. So basically what we want to do for this is load up the TCP scanner. Before we kind of dedicate to the last part, and we're going to look and see what we can find. We're going to do an initial port scan, and then we'll work through kind of looking at identifying some of the services more closely. So there'll be some more use of the search functionality. Probably 2 or 3 more modules. So if you didn't do it previously, I would recommend loading the scanner, port scan with TCP module. You should be fine leaving all those to default. Great as I'm not going to bring it in. We will set our host real quick, and then I'll let you all run this and pray that the VM doesn't go fall into space. So, also, if you haven't noticed yet, MSF Console supports tab completion. So, I recommend using it whenever you can. I don't have these. I don't have it. I'm going to 680. Double check that before we all start scanning. 680. Alright, so that should be the right one. So I'll set the R host. Mouse in the right window. And then you can just run. Like I said, if we're all running this scan at the same time, hopefully the virtual machine doesn't go toppling over on its own. Hey. Actually, finish. That will be great. Great.
I don't think that one thing is up. Because IP adder, whatever, and they changed it. I don't know when we're up without IF. It's the worst.
The adder and that name. A set address for your.
If you need to, so the sudo is not installed, so do SU, the root passwords, root backwards, and TOR. Yeah, I installed the config. I don't know. I'm old school, there's no this. We're gonna have one of these days, aren't we? I swear this is working. All the best laid plans.
I think he has.
Oh, I've got thumb drives that are going around.
I got you. Good.
We have one here.
Yeah. You need another one.
Still.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh. It's episode.
Pound 0141. 192.168.0.41. Auxiliary scanner. Scan.
Search scanner, search auxiliary scanner. Search scanner, you can also do calculations. I don't know how to do that. I want to do this one here. Type IP, space header. Oh, you're right. It's not named it.
that hot grass. That's cool.
So if you scan and you run the scanner, and you just get it where it comes back and says scan one of one host, but doesn't list anything. It just says
Yeah, so it seems like there's an issue with the VM. So I blame system. System. It's totally system. Just like a re-envision from select support. So if you grab the VM off of my OVF, your networking is not working. That's the problem. Yeah, that's what we just spent the last 5 minutes discussing. So you'll need to SU to the root user. So SU and then the password is TOR. You'll need to mod probe the network.
what's that?
Ungodly reason. So when I got in, I did mod probe VMX net 3, which should be the default of the Fusion won't use give it. I don't know what VirtualBox would give it. And then it should, if you do IP space ADER, you'll be able to figure out what its interface name is, and then you have to update the etc network interfaces file. To basically modify the second entry with the proper name, and then run ifdom. It's a pain in the ass. Why hate OVS? There's the networking away breaks.
But it's in the main directory.
Do you always have to set R hosts after you choose a module to run?
Yeah, anytime you load a new module, you have to set
Just a target, correct?
Yeah. Our host is the remote is basically short for remote host and L host, which you'll see when you do mostly when you do exploit modules is local host.
What's the global command for our host? The global command you said you don't have to be set as.
Yeah, so there's a set G that you can do that can set like our host. So that should set it globally. I try to avoid doing it because then if you forget to do it, you might have to get it. I'm more likely to do like a set G on my L host because they'll let me know. That's good. Well, apparently won't let me. So apparently there's not even a L host that they're interested. That seems like it would be more useful in my mind than having a global host. But what do I know? Alright, so now hey, look, that shit's actually scanned. That's the output you should be seeing. If you aren't seeing that, it means your networking is not working. And we can all try to combine our powers and try to get everybody's networking fixed. Or
If your database is not connected.
so if you are you using mine or are you using yours?
Yours.
Which user did you start up as a console with?
User.
Should have been connected because there should have been.
Like it just lost a connection now.
That's weird.
You start MSF console.
You can try doing that. The only way that should happen is if Postgres dies. And I don't think that should really happen. Yeah, it should just be running on local hosts. You shouldn't need the database really for much. It may make it a little slower to search. And it won't necessarily save the information from the class.
So is that the database for just all the exploits, or is it just...
So it's basically the database that maintains all the data for what you're working on, right?
Okay,
So,
gotcha.
like in this case, so like if you don't have a database open and you exit Metasploit without exporting your data or saving it in some way, when you launch again, it won't be there. But with the database, you'd actually have it. That's one of the reasons why the workspaces are useful, because then you could have different data sets within a single instance of Metasploit. So if you've managed to get a successful scan, you'll be able to actually see, like in host, you'll see the one host that you scan. In services, you'll see 20 ports open. But the amount of useful information there can be up for debate. So this is where other like auxiliary modules can come in handy. So for a lot of services, there are specific there are specific like scanners that will do information that will gather. Or it doesn't work this way. That can be used to gather service information and data. So. In this case, out of memory, I loaded the SMB version, which will basically just, because we only have one that was yeah. There's versions of these for pretty much every service. SSH version. And all that info will get populated into the services tab as information. So if you run these additional service scanners, you can then start populating these additional fields.
So for tools like that SMB scanner, like SMB version, how reliable do you normally take that?
It's usually pretty good.
Okay.
I actually, especially like in a large environment, I trust its response of what version of what business system is running more than pretty much anything else. It's pretty reliable. Because especially Samba, like an SMB, when it's actually running on a Windows box, it's very verbose in saying what version of Windows it's running.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's very good. It's the most reliable methods for identifying that I've found. A lot of these other ones are pretty straightforward, right? Like the HTTP version is literally, I mean, it's just going out and it's getting back that information from HTTP headers.
Yeah.
Same thing that SSH version, Telnet should have a version, FTP should have a version, SMTP. They're all doing that same thing, right?
Right.
So those are pretty reliable because those are clear text protocols. And SMB is pretty noisy, which is why it works so well.
Okay.
But yeah, like I said, there should be.
Alright, cancel the main progress.
So if you're actively running it, like Control C should work the same as
Like the way I use Control C, that's when my database dies.
Control C is how it always ever available.
Yeah, right.
Probably not doing something.
And the database dies when I take Control C and service, data services.
The other thing you can do, so it can be useful when you're doing, like, if you're doing if we were doing a scan, TCP scanner. Okay, just type that faster. So the other thing we can do, and so I'm going to set. So I think you can do is if you run a run or an exploit command and use a -J for certain ring, it'll run it as a job, which means it tosses it in the background. And you can do like a jobs list to see what commands are running. So it's a good way when you've got stuff that's going to take a while, like a large port scan. So I just kicked off TCP scanner to scan port 10,001 up to 65,535. That'll take a little bit longer, so I can do that to tuck it out of the way. And it will spit out output every once in a while as it finds ports. Still be updating that stuff. So, to this point, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody still have any issues either with networking and actually being able to get through the TCP scan, or have any questions or want me to go over anything that we've done so far in more depth? Yes.
How would we go through, like, for instance, if we wanted to scan HTTP, what would be the best way to just search through that massive list of exploits?
Okay, so that's actually one of the things we're going to kind of get into. Discovery. Yeah, so we're getting exploitation here like that type slide. So we went through. So this is the one thing when I've worked with the company I work with now, and in the past when I've worked with junior level penetration testers, one of the questions I always get asked is, they always ask me is, how do you figure out what you want to look at or go after, right? And for me, it's always about finding stuff that looks interesting or out of place. Now, going after digitally vulnerable VMs is a totally different scenario because you can pretty much assume almost everything in here has some exploit or vulnerability to it. But usually it's about looking for stuff that's out of place. So, I'm trying to do the same thing here. It's just but you'll find stupid shit sometimes. Just looking around, it's just a matter of trying to find and identify what you need. Looking at version information, So the more verbosity you can get out of a system for kind of vulnerabilities and issues, makes it easier to find stuff, right? So a properly set up web server that doesn't have return as much information about what the hell it's running is not near as useful to you. Because you really don't know what it's running. And it can kind of be like bang against the wall. And a lot of times it's looking for stuff that's out of place. So when I was doing internal work, a lot of what I would do is, especially with like HTTP, is you go through and look at these server versions, and then I start looking for stuff that doesn't look right. Like I would filter past all the Apache and IIS and start looking for like stuff that was running more embedded level HTTP server, because none of those were the things that nobody ever set up, and they're still running full credentials. And who needs an exploit? You can just log in as admin. And so, you know, a lot of that's kind of the part I've always had the hardest time trying to explain, is, you know, what to look for. It's one of those things that I say sometimes just it comes with experience, right? Like over time you kind of get used to seeing what doesn't look right here, or what can I exploit easily, or what am I going to be able to use to gain access. And then other times it's just a matter of, okay, well I've got, you know, 5 services and I know what versions they are, you know, going into Metasploit, going to exploit DB and looking to see are there vulnerabilities for any of those that have executable code, right? So in this case, you know, we've got, in this case I've gone and enumerated like 4 services, SSH and SMTP, the HTTP and SMB, which I need to know at least one of these because it's a shell in the box. And there's other services here that we could enumerate as well. So it's just a matter of, you know, figuring out what you want, right? So, you know, what's the next step? So, like I said, we've looked at this. We're going to look for some sort of exploit in this case, right? I'm going to assume that there's no sort of default credential issues or anything like that. In this case, I want to look at the exploit because that's what the VM is designed for, right? So, exploitation. We want to find an exploit module, and so to run against this. So you were asking, you know, how do you know, what's the best way to do that? Right? So this is where it's another place where you make it where all these different fields for search can prove useful. So when you do a search, we know our target. Linux. We know our type we want as an exploit. Actually, I might need to change target platform. Target maybe option there. We'll see. It may just be description. No. So, the problem can still be a lot of times is trying to figure out which of these will actually work because, as you can see, just doing a search doesn't always return for us the list of versions that are vulnerable. And in my experience, there's very few modern versions of Apache that are vulnerable unless they're using something else. So, let's see, what are my services again? So the other one I've got here is this SMB, which should have very few. So, in my case, I'm going to try this.
I got one with user map script.
Okay. So you have you managed to get the shell?
Yeah.
Yeah, there should. I knew the supplement was one of the ones. So the other thing that never shows up in here as an option, but it is one, is payload. Oh, yeah, complete. I want interpreter. Did it give you a interpreter shell, or did you?
I just
default to another one.
It just says command shell. I'm not sure.
I'm not going to bother too much with the second one here. Where you can see set L port and R host. You're usually, if you're doing any sort of actual like testing or engagement, you're almost always going to want to change your L port because even the dumbest of firewalls and IDSs will usually trigger around 4444.
So that's just the port our laptops or VMs are listening back through.
Yeah, so L port's is the port that you're listening to that your exploit's going to call back on.
Okay.
So normally, like, I know when I was doing stuff, we actually had our firewalls were set to pull off and install that. And anybody who's using Metasploit and is actually using it for anything malicious should have enough sense to change the port from 4444, but you'll be surprised how stupid people are.
Go L host.
Is that it? So it depends on your pay. So in this case, I chose a payload that doesn't have an L host. I also think I need to change my exploit anyway.
Yeah. I think that kind of have reverse TCP. My payload.
Okay, so yeah, it should have an L host that's using the reverse one.
Yeah. So that should be my IP address, right?
Yeah, so you want it. I may default to 0.0.0 to like list it on everything, but I usually set it to IP.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So if you're doing exploitation at this point, one thing I will say is to use Interpreter because that'll be really important to the next phase.
So what's the difference between just a command shell and interpreter?
So interpreter has a lot of functionalities and stuff built into it that a standard like command shell would have. So standard command shell is only going to basically give you access to interfacing with the shell on the box. It's not going to have all the extra functionality. Interpreter has a ton of different tools. It actually has a bunch of modules and plugins for it and converted as well. And one of the biggest things that we're going to use with that I don't believe works properly, that won't work, should work with the command shell, is actually when it comes time. So the second part of this, we're going to look at actually using our interpreter session to route traffic through it, so we can then attack the internal network from our platform.
And then how do you set that as the payload? Was it set payload?
Yeah, so you do a set payload, and then you can try to tab complete, and it'll show you all the possible options.
Okay.
A lot of this, on most of the modules, if there's an interpreter available, usually that is the default. Not always, but usually it is. And that's just choosing interpreter type.
Metasploit like go all the line out for like an antivirus system.
It can, but I've dropped an interpreter on boxes and have not. It really depends. So it also depends on the platform. And the exploits. So one of the exploits I see most often in Windows systems right now is eternal load. Because that loads everything in memory on the box that drops on. It never triggers the I've yet to trigger AV using interpreter without having to code it or do anything. I literally code over and use it. But that's because it keeps everything in memory. If it has to load stuff down, then yes, you're going to have the second you start putting stuff on disk, AV is going to start running. But if they're not running like next gen, I hate to say next gen. If they're not running any of like they're really more they're host-based things. If they're not running, program blast, or they're not running application whitelisting, they don't have something like application whitelisting, or they don't have like signage or ways to use actually otherwise they'd be like, oh, they're never going to see it.
I'm just sitting here like, he's gonna make it.
Well, spells will blow it up.
Almost all AV is designed to do good shit, and then run. If it doesn't see it, it's not. There's some
I'm gonna keep pushing.
but I get to
I'm gonna keep pushing.
I've dropped
bought
interpreter shell.
Shake it off.
And then just semantics, systems running McAfee, systems running so folks I've never had get alerted. Because of the difference in legal stars and memory. Yeah, since you feel it that way,
Whatever the one is, I just searched details of CVE for and it was 2007 24 That's the CVE I found for that version of software.
should be this one. It's such an hour.
Should be like, is it execute? You could try like period //
Is there a way to just go like out a bunch of different attacks? Hail Mary. I know that you do that in Armitage, but I'm not really sure what to do after that.
Yeah, there's I don't know if there's a module built into. So I know there's a couple different like auto exploit type functions. So I don't know if there's one. I don't remember if there's one built in. It's a little bit of an ugly process to do, right? Like, it's not something
Like you have to go through all these various variables. It's kind of pain.
yeah, and if you're doing like a penetration test, it's not exactly the quietest method of getting access to a box. So it's not one. There's a lot of those downlines. It's just some ones. Yeah, so the Samba exploit that works is multi-platform. Unix one. It does not load. It does not have an option for observer, which is frustrating as hell.
So, is it the case that like a lot of stuff like that is specific to like the exploit or the platform?
So yeah, usually it's going to limit the payload based on the platform. So one thing I may be able to do is reload that up. It's use module just So the other thing we're going to go to is let's use
You have a G in there. Just a G.
That's a cool.
Yes.
I googled the name of the version and then exploit, and it brought up like an exploit that works with that. So then I searched.
See, my search never came up with versions.
yeah. So searching the versions can be kind of pain in the ass because if they don't put things in the description, if they don't, especially if you're searching a version that doesn't tell you the description. So a lot of times what's usually easier is to take your version information, go out and search that like for like a CP, try to search for a CP. terminal. It's usually more reliable.
Yeah. No, what I was mentioning is when I did my services, mine doesn't show any versions of it.
Right. So, one of the things that we went through before we were into this using these different scanners. So, there's a bunch of these individual service scanners that
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. You have to do it for one. You have to do it for each one.
yeah, so you basically do it for each one. One of the reasons why I like DBN map over a lot of the regular scanners, because I can tell if I have this map installed and I do DBN map, I can have it do service scanning as part of the functionality, so a lot of this gets populated.
Correct. Gotcha.
Yeah. For me, when I do an assessment, typically what I'll normally do is actually more times than not is I'll run nmap, save all my output XML files, and then import it into new DBM import in Metasploit to import the XML. So that's how I typically do it. I don't really run my scans through Metasploit for various reasons. There's more shit to bring. Habits, Postgres, parse on itself or whatever. Next thing you know, none of your stuff's saved. So
Got it.
Add the smiley face capability.
Yeah, so. Why do some modules complain and one like our hosts specifically, or our hosts specifically?
So some modules, so that's one thing to that comes to. So modules that allow you to do multiple targets at a time will take on those masks.
Okay.
Ones that don't want to single host.
That makes sense.
There's a few auxiliary modules on your scanners that don't want to take an R host. Those are the ones that drive me nuts. Okay. Most of the times it's like, there's no reason you can't do multiples. And then there's part of me that would also sometimes like to be able to do R host finesse on exploit modules and just throw 20 shells all at once and see what the hell comes back.
Got a shell. Okay. What exploit? You make such that SQL backdoor.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the smiley face one.
Yeah. Just hanging out on shell.
So if you have one if you have a module that has just like a reverse shell, you're going to usually just have like a blank screen sitting there for you to do commands and stuff on the remote system. So this is one of the reasons why I need to figure out which one of these lectures I'm trying to record this drop.
Is this Metasploitable too?
If you didn't mention it.
Okay. so if you type in services, you see it's on your sound it's version. So you want to search like the search command and also where you slash yes, you guys. Do you have the database? We can take a look at it.
Yeah, you don't want to run it like somebody had that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, but the manual
That buffer overflow wasn't working for me either. I wasn't getting the section out of it. I wasn't getting the load of names.
Using Metasploit.
whatever you can.
Oh, yes.
He was talking about the guys who show up under the screen. Yeah, the rest of the guys. So, you know,
Start recording again.
Do any of you guys have USB-C chargers? Yeah, I do. Yeah, you too. Do you have
Yeah, I don't charge it, but I also have USB-C. I don't have
It's alright. I wonder if my phone charges will charge.
Not for sure.
I tried my C1, we tried like an SSH or an HTTP one.
It's a machine dial, yes.
I guess it's kind of like next door or something.
That's very simple. And yet very difficult. Because I'm most of the machine up.
Try scanning WordPress.
That one's on the web board.
Not sure. So,
It doesn't have like on the service. But if there's a WordPress site on it, I don't think there is on those. Yeah, just hit the website for it.
you can see it.
Wikipedia my admin.
Oh, that's right.
I did see the word pop up. Got one for free.
Try going to the web stuff. Like, open up the web browser, you go to that address, one address, and it
There's some stuff.
Separate your part of your network.
Given the speech over here,
The timing's a little slower.
flew in from the last night.
Put your foot again. Ashley.
Ashley. Ashley.
Yeah, paralyzed.
Checking when I was standing there at the desk and was talking to the guy as well.
That's rude.
I have a center toward the left. Because I have to go to the left hand side of the not at the
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Not that one.
So,
I got so many. I'll watch videos tonight. That's all I do. Study videos. So, what I learned when I absorbed one,
post-exploitation stuff.
it's
There's
like a puzzle.
actually,
That's since you got it on there now.
Exactly.
the first VM that we were looking at.
So it's not a complete
serves the internal network. Take a look at as well. So, we'll kind of go through some
Like the more you know, the more problems.
after lunch.
Recording.
Okay. Recording.
It's relevant.
Before I dive too deep, I will let everybody try to see if more people's dagger back in. Lunch.
Oh, okay. I got the recording going regardless. If you say stuff, you will get caught.
Otherwise, you just have boring silence for everyone who watches the video.
Cut that part out.
Yeah. We'll take care of this in post. Because I want everybody to make sure, I want to make sure everybody who is here gets a interpreter shove. That would be important for the next part.
Yeah, but I didn't have Does it matter which interpreter shell, that, or like for which exploit, or just so that we have one?
Just so long as we have one.
Okay.
There's actually, I think with this one I've now got 3 that everybody should be able, there's 3 different ways you should be able to get into the shell.
Yeah, Postgres.
Postgres, there's
FTP.
there's a Tomcat one as well, and then there's a CGI PHP one. It's the only one that actually uses an exploit versus. But it's all good. So, I really don't know.
shrunk a little bit.
Three more minutes and then get started.
Then, when you run the host command, you actually get information back. Mine says database not connected.
Okay, yeah, that's because you probably lost. Well, so when you install it, you set it to DB on your system.
They didn't hit it to DB. It's interesting.
It may have lost the connection. You can try to do like DB connect and how to reload the connection. I've had more success just clicking Metasploit. Alright. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, so the next step is post-exploitation. So we have a shell, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is actually make sure everybody has a shell. And it not only has a shell, but has a return shell. Preferably one that is a user. Preferably. So I'm going to use auxiliary use export module. So if you didn't get a shell, we're going to use this one here. So you can do use exploit multi HTTP, PHP, CGI, or injection. We show the options up here. We see using a PHP reverse TCP PHP interpreter payload. There's our Argos port. Just really need to set anything extra up here. And then what we do is set payload. PHP interpreter reverse TCP to get that payload.
For the payload
sessions, huh?
Sorry. For the payload, what's the difference between the reverse TCP and the bind TCP?
So bind is going to create an open port on the other device, so that instead of basically calling out, we'd be connecting in. You're almost always going to have more luck with a reverse TCP because most things aren't going to lie. Like if you're coming through a firewall or any sort of IPS or something like that, you're going to probably trigger if something has a file open. The reverse TCP, usually what you can do is, even if you're in a restricted environment, if you set a call-out port for something like 53 or call-out 443, most IDS firewalls aren't going to look at it too deep because they're assuming you're sending DNS traffic. Unless they're doing a deep inspection of the traffic, they're not going to think any wise about it. So more times than not, you're going to use reverse versus bind. But there could be some situations where bind. Thanks. Thanks. Session, yes. So I'm just cleaning up the session so I don't want to have a session hell trying to figure out what we're doing after when we get our session. So I'm going to now run this exploit. And we'll set the stage here. Now I have an interpreter. So, interpreter is the kind of de facto Metasploit shell. You can use, there are other like command level shells that you can use on systems, but they don't have a lot of power. They're basically good for surveying a box, but they're not going to be a lot of good for doing much post-exploitation. Interpreter is a lot better for that in many instances. You can run some commands from in here. Some will work, some won't work. Stuff that doesn't, you can always. So interpreter, just like running in Metasploit, you can run help or question mark, and it will show you all the functional commands you can do. Some of which are directly mapped from other ones. So when you need to get system information, if it's not available through here, you can always just run a shell. And so it'll kick us down to essentially here, and if I do like type privilege, I don't. Good job.
That's the same thing that was happening with Zach.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I may not, because this is Java one, we may not have shell. So interpreter, when you get a job interpreter, is a little bit different. Yeah, I can see how you guys connect to it. So. Show dark. That's another show. Alright, so this so I'm gonna run background to kick myself out of. I mean, I could do this from here, but I'm gonna be out. So we're background. Active session 12. So, as I mentioned before, all the post-exploitation modules are going to exist in the post. Post, there's Linux, gather. So, in any post-exploitation, once you've gotten access to a box, the trick is there's kind of three things we want to try to be able to do. First off, if we don't have root, like we don't in this case, you want to try to potentially have to look for escalation paths. So we can look and see what other services there's anything running on the box that we couldn't see from an external that's available internally. We want to look to see what this is connected to, and we want to try to pivot. So we want to see what this is connected to, what other options we have for moving around the network are. And basically just general information gathering. So there's not a lot of post Linux escalation modules. Actually, there are not. That doesn't mean you're out of luck. It just means that there's no post modules for it. So we're going to work on gathering here in this case. So what we want to do so. So if you go into the enumerations, any of the stuff, almost everything you can do with post-exploitation is all going to basically only rely on the session number. So you're good to go, you set your session. Now this can do, you can run these from inside of the interpreter session. You can tell it to load a module. If you do it in that way, you usually don't have to give the session ID because it knows when it's an active session you're working with. So, doing the network enumeration, it's going to grab a bunch of different information here. You can see it tells you, it failed to open some of these folders it doesn't have permission for, but then it goes through and grabs, it downloaded network configuration information and downloaded all that stuff to text files within our loot folder. And if you ever wonder what your loot is, that might be a business good. Loot will show you, but you can also go over here to loot, and you'll see your information in here. So this is just a list of directories. So you can see it grabs the route information, some of the listening information. We have our network interfaces, so we can see the first Ethernet interface it captured that has the port we're connected to on 141. And now we see ETH1 has a 10.0.0.5 address. So now we know that there's a second network this is connected to. So this means that maybe there's other systems we want to look at that aren't accessible. So that gives us another network to look at, right? And that's what I think we're going to do, the pivoting. Oh, route to work with. Grabbed all the NetStat data. So it grabs all this stuff and shows it in files, which is nice because you don't have to try to capture the session and have all this information saved, right? We can just basically use this to gather up information. So the enum system here has gathered the uname output, who we're running as, and then starts stashing information like the users, the accounts, a list of installed packages, the running services, the cron jobs, all the disk info. So all this stuff gets stored out. So this can be done to help automate, to grab a lot of the information that you normally do on post-exploitation information gathering. And this is where a lot of the plugins people have written can be handy because they've got, people write plugins that will basically go in and run commands of post-exploitation that will do a lot of these information gathering. So that you can just have one command to do 5 or 6 different lines or one grab to get information. The other one, the most common one I use on like a Windows exploit is do a lot of once to gather credentials. It's more common on like the Windows boxes, just because you get all the cache credentials on and stuff like that that you can pull out that way. And there's even it works and we get onto the second VM. That one is a Windows VM, and that should. We should be able to kind of look at the UV-Cats plugin for the program. Hopefully, that's the goal. So, we've looked around. Like I said, there's different types of things that we're going to want to do. Right? Gather data, expand our access, get privilege escalation, pivot. And in this case, we want to look at a little bit of pivoting because the goal here is, we saw when we pulled out the network information that there's a second network interface. So looking at pivoting, this is great for moving from one network to another. I've seen restricted environments where only sysadmin boxes have access to certain systems on the network. They're really restricting down access. Particularly true for like networking here. I've seen where like they'll limit access to the management interfaces from only a set number of systems based on IP addresses. So it could be good to have that access. Or even just moving across nodes from the same network. You're going to find different types of data, different systems. So it's good to be able to move around. So there's basically two primary ways to do this. The old way, which I'm sure interpreter works will yell at us for trying to do, is
Speak good and loud, by the way. Others won't pick it up.
Alright, well, I'll do my best.
But you have the red bowl for your wife. Your wife wants a red bowl. She sent me in the picture with a red bowl.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to get my session down. And this could wind up being as much of an issue of how many of us are in the box now. So I need to go back to exploit module. Alright, well, now that I'm in here, do alright, so this is the output for that. Let's just I'll have one of them. Oh no, it's the best. Okay. Description deprecated. I didn't give it the subnet, that's why. So you'll get this deprecated thing, and I'll tell you, hey, you should just really run this. Which we can do. Post manage on route. It doesn't exist. How dare you? Alright, so I'm going to background it because we can do it from out here without having to do it. So you can do routes, like just straight up like a Linux or Windows route more or less. So basically just give it a route. So we saw that other network was 10.0.0.network, so we do 10.0.0.0, subnet mask, and what should I add in front of this? And then you just give it the session ID. And this is why we need interpreter. Standard command shell doesn't have the built-in stuff to handle to it traffic routing. If this worked, should be able to get that because that's the inside of that one. Let me go check and make sure it's actually that key. What's the second time we're going to hit it? It could also be a route that's failing because no contrary level of access. So mask the two Fusion crashes anytime I try to open my VM. That's just making my head hurt. So, hey. By that time. I want to exit that session because I type was probably. Restart the box.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
The internal VM claims that you 6.8 gigahertz of CPU. I don't even know if that's physically possible in Fusion, and is chugging down on RAM. So I'm gonna restart the attack box. We've all been beating on it so long. It's like doesn't even want to try anymore. So that we'll show a little bit. So we have extra subs. Oh, I know which one to go.
I'm good, Ash. I'm good. There's me. She's like, he did that. Yeah, what's it made out of? No, fine.
Thank you very much.
a trivial question.
Uh-huh.
So when I background my interpreter session, how do I get back to it?
You can run sessions, and it'll list out the number of sessions, and then you just do session number session.
Thanks.
So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to change the network that this other team is on to the one that we already have access to, because I want to be able to look at this because I just put stuff to so particularly from an interpreter point of view. So.
Yeah, there's basically over a shower.
So what we're going to do,
You can set a route. You can set a route with that. Yeah. So
here. So what I want to do, I keep it coding what I want. I do want to still take a look at, thank you. I just want to take a look at this other Windows VM because there's a few different things in this Windows interpreter that are good to be able to play with. So, yeah. What we want to do is do a port scan. We'll do another TCP scan this time. Our IP is sure. 0.6. Set first 7,000 ports should be sufficient, I think. We'll run. This will start splitting the map data already. We can see. Services. 6 is the launch. That's what we get. Port scan, TCP, six. Just port starts now. Services. So start with SMBs servant. So we're going to do auxiliary scanner SMB. Search. 6. Run. Alright, so we see Windows 2008 or 2.1. So we see this server 2008 box. So it scans on for a reason. Do a search on platform. Windows. Alright, so here's some of the exploits that are SMB related. So the one we want to look at is actually MS17010, which is the one, the original one. So we're going to use exploit Windows SLB MS. Let's blue, internal blue. We do info here, so you'll see that the original internal blue is only good for 7 and SecureWV or 2. Somebody made an extended one that works on 8, and then another one that works with PSXF. But in theory, this should work with just setting the six. I'll go ahead and set the payload. So I'm going to do this as a 99% certain. This is running x64, so we'll try x86 payload. And I got the second. So, actually, there's two thought processes behind this. So, well, this exploit only works x64, so it's not a big deal. But you'll get, on some Windows boxes, if you're throwing exploits, you may want to throw an x86 as the default because it's always going to run, an x64 system, but you're going to have limited access to certain plugins and certain modules that may not function properly. So ultimately, you may want to have to.
Actual one of what's the set payload thing is that actually creating the one whole.
Yeah, so this decides which exploit to use. So this will pull from the existing ones. And you can, so there's other variables you can set. So, so when you set a payload, you'll see you've got your normal options. But there's also a set coder option too that will show up that allows you to also do like if you want to do things to try to bypass AV. You can do some of that in line here by setting different encoders. There's a few other little things you can play with that too, but yeah, payload chooses which of the items and it uses the preset defined ones. You can also build ones using MSF Venom if you want to build one outside of Metasploit. Yeah. So if I run this, I know it works. Another downside, so the thing I'll say about Eternal Blue is if you wind up using it, it has a tendency to fail randomly. I think in part because of multiple race conditions, so it's not, it doesn't always trigger the first time, and it can take a little longer than some of the exploits. Interpreter. So, Eternal Blue should work to get you to Windows. The reason I wanted to do a Windows box is for some of the commands here. So, one, go to shell and run command type. You see we have system, which is great. But I also want to make sure that you get a chance to see the tons of extra options that you have within Windows. There's just a lot of extra tools because, to be honest, most testing here for doing something like this is. So you have all the stuff to do screen caps, getting desktop images, all this sort of fun stuff. If you don't have system to do that, but there's like a hash dump, which I grab the same database with the box. You can see it's just pull all this data, which you have like caches for the system. The other thing is there's a load. So if you run load, you'll see some of the different things that you can do. So it's maybe cats and the updated replacement kiwi. But when you do this, you now have a whole separate set of commands. So you get a whole separate set of commands that kiwi and Mimi cats can do, which will allow you to do other sort of credential gathering. And since it loads stuff in memory, you don't have to crack it. So they give you Mimi cats. So it pulls. Kiwi is just an updated version of Mimi cats. I believe it was a fork because the development of Mimi cats kind of died out at some point. But those modules, the two modules work the same. I think they still both work on most versions of Windows. But you can see, you load this, and before where I just got it hashed up, now I actually get, oh hey, here's the SSHD server account, and it knows its password. Same with the Vagrant account. And so it pulls that stuff out. It's useful in the sense that it's doing this to pull out those credentials is easier than trying to, hashcat those. That would at least take time to hashcat that. That one's easy, right? So you can do. It also has things to do like password changes. You can generate. Cred's all just dumped all that stuff for us. You can do a global ticket creation if you're actually on a network with a domain and all that jazz. So it just gives you more tools. And like I said, there's other tools and other functionalities that you can load through here to do specific things. Tags. And you pull up the info, and so then there's like LAN attacks gives you like the options to do like different DHCP options. You could set up rogue TFTP servers to inject bad firmware on devices and stuff like that. So there's plenty of there's lots of that's all from the load. The load extensions. But not only that, so let's back up the session. Use post use. Session. Session back so we can use that. I wish I would have been able to do a little more activity, but like I said, I'm not sure if it's an issue with the VM. I know I had it working before I left home, so let's check it out. I have Windows once I get my session back, but you can see there's a lot more tools and a lot more functionality that you get. Failed the first time. As it's similarly completed by Eternal Glue, it is the modern equivalent of MS 08067 for pen testers. just kind of funny to say because I've gotten a shell on a test in the last year on MSOA. This is but this one can be kind of rough to. It takes a while to load up, but the other problem you're going to do is a lab setup like this is that multiple people will try to do this exploit kit. Over time, the box just starts killing sessions. Maybe. So, let's see what else on the slide stuff. I went over that. We didn't need to do routing, but you saw the command functionality, how they work. Basically, that allows you to pivot when it works right. That's what it does. And then you wind up back at the full penetration test in the spot. Last slide, and then this last slide. See if they're going to show that. Still going to show. Okay. Any questions? Everything that I've tried to cover today.
That PDF, what you were looking at, where is that?
These are the slides that I generated. I can probably share those.
Twitter? Were you sharing Twitter?
I'll put it up on Twitter. Also, I'll send it out to Google Docs as I fill in the blanks.
My favorite interpreter option is play an audio file in the target system.
Yes. So those should now be shared. Hopefully shared.
Did you put it in your Twitter?
Yeah, it's should be on my Twitter. Just.
No.
Like I said, I'll fill in some blanks I have in there. I'll also be sure to tag my that's going to be. a couple of days once it's done moving. So, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm still here, so we'll at least tear this down.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you.